Are you good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right, Glenn Flutie.
How you doing, buddy?
Welcome to the Millhouse.
This is cool. This is exciting. Glad to be here.
Yeah, no, God, we've been waiting to do this for some time. We shouldn't have been waiting. We were just kind of busy running around, but
Yeah.
obviously, one of the greatest tarpon fishermen on the planet with 5 consecutive Gold Cup wins, but also a great bone fisherman. So today I'd like to speak about not only about tournament fishing,
Yeah.
but tarpon fishing in general, what the average guy may learn from our discussion here today. But also, growing up in the Keys, going to high school with all your buddies, Timmy, Klein, and Brewer and the boys.
Yeah.
Where would you like to start this conversation?
Well, it's interesting because I actually grew up in Miami Springs. So why don't we just quickly start there? I had, by the time I was 12 years old, I'd been doing quite a bit of fishing or playing tennis. I lived right down the street from a tennis court. Did a lot of fishing there, and my parents were divorced when I was very young. So my mom was trying to raise 2 boys, and my older brother was not an easy guy to hang around with. He was always into some sort of trouble. Nice trouble.
As if you weren't?
Yeah, nice trouble. But he had his hands full for my mom. So I used to go down to the Keys all the time with my grandparents because they had a place down there in Tavernier. And I went down there the summer of my 12-year-old in 1972. And I just had so much fun. And my mom knew how much I enjoyed fishing. And because she was a single parent at that point trying to raise 2 boys, she said, "Would you like to stay down there with your father?" And I said, "Well, I don't know if I want to stay with my father, but I'll stay with my grandfather." So I stayed with my grandfather for a while. My dad, as a lot of people do know, I love my dad dearly, but he had a drinking problem. So happy hour to my dad was probably more important than doing anything else.
Right, and your father was an offshore fisherman.
He was at that time. Actually, he started off as a backcountry guide, and we get that because Captain Gary Ellis actually mentored my dad. So lo and behold, I got down there. My dad got remarried to an absolute wonderful, wonderful person who loved fishing more than life itself. So Sandra and I just started fishing together because very quickly I think she realized that being married to my dad is so many of the past relationships that I heard of my dad is he was a great boyfriend, but a horrible husband. So Sandy and I kind of filled our own gap.
Right.
I needed a fishing partner and she loved to do it. So, we started doing that, but we started off red fishing in 72. I remember we went out to the crossbank and I'm seeing all these things tail, and I'd never seen a tailing redfish before. Didn't see anything tailing before. And we came back all excited thinking, what the heck was that? So at the time, my dad was guiding out of Plantation Harbor and Gary Ellis back at now Founders Park. And Gary explained what that was and told us what to do. And
How old were you at this time?
I was 12.
Okay.
And Gary gave me I think he had a rep that he was working with that did an old Shakespeare Wonder Rod. You remember the old Shakespeare spinning rod? They were short, fiberglass, little bitty things. And they had a little, almost like a plastic reel that went to it. That had a plastic drag. It was a little like a purple reel.
Right.
He gave me one of those. He said, "Go use that and throw bucktails at those things. You'll have a blast." So we started doing that and we started catching all these redfish. And that was very, very cool. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And he said to me, "Do you ever thought about bone fishing?" And I said, "Well, what's a bonefish?" And he said, "Oh, no, there's no such thing as what's a bonefish. I'm going to go show you what a bonefish is." So he took my dad and I out. This was again in 72.
Mm-hmm.
And we went up to, up by Rodriguez Key, just back there behind Dove Key in that little area on the shoreline. And we went up in there, and everywhere you looked were these little dark black bullet bonefish, little 3, 4, 5 pounders, just in herds everywhere. So I'm throwing, and my jig's going in every direction because I haven't refined that yet at all. And he says, "Here, let me show you. So he throws out, throw a little white Millie's bucktail, throws out, and he jigs it twice. One eats it, he hands it to me, and that was just so exciting. And he did it a couple times for me, and he said, "So what do you think?" I said, "Okay, this is great. So where do I catch one?" And he goes, "You just caught some." I said, "No, I didn't. You did. When do I get to catch one?"
Right.
So he said, "Okay, let's go somewhere else." And we ran up into the south end of Key Largo. We went up through the channel, went up in there. As soon as we went up into, we took an immediate right and went right in that big pocket in there. And he says, "Glenn, when we get up in there, they're gonna be bonefish everywhere. You're not gonna believe what you're gonna see." And I'm like, "Okay." So far it's been pretty cool. So we'll give it out there. And we got in there, and Andy, again, these little fish, 4 or 5 pounders in schools of hundreds of them. Everywhere you could look, it looked like just black clouds moving around. And I threw the bucktail out there, bunched it twice, boom, he ate it. And, you know, I don't know how many I ended up catching because my dad was just taking them off and I was throwing again. And we just had a blast. And we got back to the dock and Gary gave me that rod. Unfortunately, I have bad pictures of it, but you can see back in, that was actually it. That was the summer of 72. That's the first one I ever caught.
Wow.
And that's back with one of those little bitty rods.
Was that your light bulb moment where you were going to be connected to this fish?
That's when it connected me to the Keys beyond what I thought it could be.
Right.
Because I love to fish. Like I said, before I moved to the Keys, we bass fished up in the lakes, up in the golf courses, and that was a lot of fun. But this, just nothing ran like this. And I mean, this was very cool. So that's kind of where I started.
So Timmy Klein says that you used to keep a rod in your locker at school, and I think your football coach or the gym coach used to write you passes so you could skip school, go catch bonefish. Tell me about those years.
Were you in Coral Shores? Or?
I did. I started in Coral Shores. I was that was our first year there. And that summer I met a couple of friends of mine. I met one of them, Doug Hyman, and Mr. Hyman was one of the owners of the old Worldwide Sportsman. So he did a tremendous amount of bone fishing. Mr. Hyman did. Doug and I started doing other fishing, red fishing and whatnot, but I really started pushing towards bonefish. I really, really enjoyed the bonefish. So I just started popping along and seeing that. And then that very first summer, I met Mike Carrier, who you know very well.
Sure.
And Michael was just a fishing fanatic for bonefish. He loved bonefish. So him and I started getting together. And because Mike lived in Ocean Reef and I lived right across the street from Coral Shores, Michael would stay at my house a lot during the school year. And he would just stay there and we'd go to school. Well, lo and behold, we weren't really going to school every morning. When it was nice and it was glass calm, Michael and I would go fishing. And Jim Mooney, who's now, I think, a congressman for us, was our PE teacher. And Jim would write a pass and Glenn and Michael were helping me in the gym this morning to excuse us. But he always made sure that we had our grades up. You know,
right.
If he was going to do that, he would let us do it, and we took advantage of it. We didn't ask. I mean, we just come back and say, hey, Jim, we need a pass.
So how old were you when you moved to the Keys? I thought you were just saying you were 12.
I was 12.
So these are earlier years than when you were 12 that you were skipping school.
No, that was the first year when I was 12. That was the summer of the first year that I moved to the Keys. Because I couldn't get away with that back home.
You asked him where he was living. You said that you were living in Coral Shores, but this is when you actually moved down.
This is when I actually moved to the Keys.
Living with your dad.
Yeah. That was the summer of 72.
And so then your dad gravitated to the offshore. How did
what
that
it did is,
transition take place?
My dad had a back surgery when he was younger. And it didn't go well. He had permanent nerve damage in his leg. And it got difficult for him to go up and down on the polling platform.
Right.
He had a 17 Mako. So he needed to do something different. So my grandfather bought him I think it was a 28 Bertram. And that's when my dad started doing offshore fishing. And that's when I started mating for my dad, offshore fishermen, of which I found out very quickly. I got seasick. So I learned to live off of, it's horrible. So you guys,
we're into the seasick thing.
Join the club.
It's horrible, isn't it?
The worst thing. We were talking about that yesterday. I would rather die than have to stay out there for another 6 hours vomiting your stomach.
No, it's so bad. We've been to Costa Rica. We've been to Panama. I really want to try to catch a billfish on fly, but it's like, God, I haven't got one yet, but I'm just dreading going back. I mean, it's very cool. And I wish I didn't get seasick because I love it out there. I love offshore. I love looking at the frigate birds. I love that whole dynamics. But, God, I just don't want to get sick again.
You know those sea bands. You ever seen those sea bands?
Yeah, we tried everything.
They didn't work for you?
Scopolamine patches, bands. So get this. So Nikki and I want to go to Panama.
Yeah.
Okay, so Tom Evans has got his boat down there with Dean Butler, and they're trying to catch a world record black marlin. I told Nikki, I said, we need to see the greatest team ever assembled to catch big billfish on fly, which were those guys. So we flew down and we're hanging out with them. And Tom said, look, if we raise a marlin, I'll throw the fly. If we raise a sailfish, you throw the fly. We get out there for...
Well, he calls them sea turds.
Yeah, with no respect for the sailfish. They don't fight very hard, and they're big and dumb and flop around. Anybody can catch them.
Kind of what I used to think about tarpon. We'll get to that in a minute.
So Every day, the first day going out, okay, it's slicked off calm, but the sea's got this rolling,
You're gonna get me sick now.
mountainous rolls to it. And I look at Nicky, and he looks at me, and I'm going, I don't want to say anything. He didn't want to say anything. We're looking at each other like, are you feeling it? Are you getting sick?
We make a bet.
We make a bet. Who's going to throw up first loses, right? So then every morning after that, Nicky and I are fighting for the couch because on one couch, here's Tom Evans. Evans can't stand up. He's got 16 back surgeries.
Oh, okay.
So he's laying on a couch waiting for the captain and the maid to start screaming at, left rigger or right rigger. And Nicky and I are fighting for the other couch because we're just dying to get under the couch and try to go to sleep so we don't get seasick. It was just...
No, it's horrible. And my dad had this great idea. We used to like to bottom fish. So my stepmother and I and my dad were going out to the reef one weekend. And Dad's like, Glenn, the only way you're going to get over this is you're just going to have to get it sick and let it run through you. Well, we got out there on a Friday night. By Saturday morning, I almost needed to get airlifted off that boat. Oh, my stepmother was so pissed. She's like, Albert, because anybody that knew my dad, they called him Albert when they were pissed. Albert, you take Glenn home right now. And I'm like, I can't even stand up. And he wasn't good. He says, no, he'll get over this. And she's like, take him home. I mean, this is enough. And I got to tell you, I started living on Dramamine, which is not...
Makes you sleepy.
Oh, it's
horrible.
awful. So I got to the point where I just couldn't stand going offshore anymore.
Yeah, I hear you. But you used to mate and have to clean the boat.
I used to mate and clean the boat. I did that just for gas money for my little boat so that I could just go red fishing and bone fishing.
Right. What's this about Mickey Mantle? They were fishing and they took a bunch of fish. They were in a helicopter and dumped all the guts on your dad's boat. Well, what's up with that?
You know what? I wasn't there when that happened, but that wouldn't surprise me because I made it on the boat a few times with Mickey. What a great guy. He was funny man. Loved to play jokes. And him and Dad used to just laugh and go crazy. And Mickey always had a gentleman that was with him. I don't know if it was called, it was his handler, but his good friend was always with Mickey. And they fished a lot with my dad. I made it a few times with them. But like I said, that was kind of winding down, but that wouldn't surprise me.
Have you heard that rumor before?
I heard it, but I never saw it. And I was not asked to clean the boat afterwards. So I was kind of out of it by then. But it wouldn't a bit surprise me because Mickey used to come fish Dad when he was at the harbor. Because my dad used to keep his boat there.
Well, we'll leave that story in limbo then.
Yeah, so I can't make sure it happened, but I heard something like that and I started laughing.
Something like they got in a helicopter and they threw a bunch of fish guts on your dad's boat upon departure or something like that. It sounds a little outlandish. But anyway, let's go back to growing up. Now you're in the Keys. You're living with your grandfather. Mm-hmm. And you're going to school with Timmy Klein and Brewer.
Timmy and Brewer were actually a year behind me. Actually, they're 2 years. No, they're 1 year behind me because they were the same age as Ricky Moeller. So now I'm fishing with, we're going out in the mornings. We're going out in the afternoons. But it's interesting because back in those days, we only knew that bonefish only showed up. We only liked tailing bonefish. Did not like mudding bonefish. So they tailed on a rising tide and the last the falling tide. So
why didn't you like mudding bonefish?
I couldn't read them. And to me, part of what I would consider my success in bone fishing is Jimmy Lopez. I was lucky to have quite a few really, really good mentors back in the day. And Jimmy heard that I liked tailing bonefish. And Jimmy loved tailing bonefish. He was a great bone fisherman. I ended up fishing against him that tournament I won when I was 16. And he taught me, Glenn, look, the fish is going to show you what to do. And if you just study the fish, he's going to show you when he's ready to dip down to eat. This is when you should put the fly there. Watch his dorsal. Watch what the fish does. And he's going to tell you what it takes to make it eat. I couldn't read a fish under the water when he was mudding. He was there doing his thing, but I couldn't do it. And of course, Michael Currier, one of the best mudding bone fishermen I've ever seen,
right?
He just laughed at me because I couldn't catch anything when they mudded. He's like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
But isn't that the best time to catch those big bonefish when they're mudding because they're feeding?
Not to me. They're feeding when they're tailing too. So, it's just two different ways of looking at it. Jimmy told me that watch the bonefish as he's moving. And then as soon as you start to see him tip down, put the fly within a foot of his nose.
Right.
Just drop it right there instantly and don't do anything. And then he said, as soon as the bonefish starts to tip down, don't go, bump, slowly strip it. And I asked him why instead of bumping, he says, because I want that fly to pull through. We used to have a lot of good grass back in those days on the flats. And he said, that fly's going to push through the grass and it's going to create a little silt coming off the grass. And he said, again, this is what he was telling me, was the natural thing that a prey would do leaving that fish.
Especially a crab.
Especially a crab, because they're going to kick that little silt
Right.
off of that. And sure enough, I would do that, and I would just slowly strip it, and you'd watch that his dorsal, as he was coming back down, just go boink, right back up, and he would just run over, and I would just watch them pin down. Half the time, it's interesting, they would say, strip till you feel him. I didn't. As soon as I saw him go and pin down, I would just lift up.
It's interesting with permit. I remember just before I fished the Del Brown with Dustin Huff, I was asking Kilpatrick, what is the key, one of the most key things to read with permit when they tip down? Just like the bonefish we were just talking. He said, look, a lot of fish will tip down like this, but a permit won't necessarily have it until he pins it to the ground. So when a permit tips up, wait till that tail wiggles like this, because that way he's trying to swim down and pin that crab. And that was a light bulb moment for permit fishing for me. Now, when that bonefish tips down, he's in such shallow water, he probably didn't have to swim and pin it. As soon as he tips down, I always thought he had it, and you just slide it tight.
It's interesting because, like I said, when I would see him pin it down, Andy, if you think back, because you've caught a lot of bonefish like we both have, you will also see them get a little bit of a jitter on their dorsal and their tail. I mean, you can see that he's made
Digging
contact.
it. Yeah.
He's like, I'm on you.
Right.
And the minute he did that, I never strip striked. It didn't work for me. I just started to slowly lift it. And if it came at the slightest type, then I would just pop, and bink it up.
Right.
And that was generally on. So that, he just perfected that for me. And people would laugh at me when I would be out there and I'd see bonefish moving. I wouldn't throw. Harry said to me,
Wait for him to tail.
he'd say, why aren't you throwing? We were in the spring.
Because you don't want the fish to see your fly land.
I didn't want to see it go, and the fish is moving, and you know what? He's in shallow water. When they're up in that real shallow water, if they're not aggressively trying to get away from the shallow water, they're up there because they're feeding in that shallow water.
Mm-hmm.
So Jimmy used to tell me, give them a chance to find something to feed on. But he said, keep alert, keep within the right distance at all times, so that when that fish starts to go, and he wouldn't even wait till it went. He says, as soon as you start to see it tip, you put the fly in the water already. Now, the interesting thing about that, when we were kids in the early 70s, before I started fly fishing, we went to plug rods with Millie's bucktails. And Andy, you fished a lot of downtown like I've done around Shell Key and Main Bank. Ricky Moeller and I started plug casting about the same time because Mr. Hyman, again, really good plug caster, and he gave me my first outfit. They would hear a Millie's bucktail hit the water. We'd lead those things, might be like, as soon as, again, they would start to tail, you'd lead them 5 or 6 feet. They would hit it. I mean, they would hear it hit, Nicky, and they would get up and they would just
Race
run.
to it.
Just run and they just go boom.
Wow.
And just, I mean, we're talking 10, 12, 13-pound fish on downtown in Main Bank, just running over to inhale it. It was a blast.
How technical was it back then to find these bonefish? Did they have little edges and were certain corners of the flat better than others, or were you just going to the flat and there were tails everywhere, like you hear back in the 60s?
Again, it goes back to how you were raised, and I wanted to be the most successful that I could every time I hit the flat. So I'm one of those people that most people don't understand. I like to really understand why they're there. And they're there to feed, we know that. But where are the exit points on the falling tide that they have to leave from? And then where are those entrance points that want to bring them back up on the bank?
Wouldn't that be the same area?
It is in some cases on some flats, and other flats you'd be surprised. They might come up and leave
or feed all the way down an edge.
They
and
go
then
all the
exit.
way down a slough and then exit, but yet when the tide comes in, they come in from the other side.
Right. The water depth is different.
Yeah. So we'd always try to find that, and we'd find those ambush points. And that made it very successful. Back when you're talking about, we used to go through, like Mike Carrier and I, or Ricky Moeller and I in the mornings, and we'd go out through Snake Creek, or especially Snake Creek, and we'd come out and we'd look at the last of the falling or the first of the rising. You'd look to the north, you'd look to the south and say, well, you know what? There's only like about 300 tailing over here, but it looks like 1,000 of them over here. So let's go over there. It was literally that crazy.
Can we go back briefly for maybe somebody who's listening to the stripping versus sliding a fly? And I found out that especially in certain areas like big bonefish areas, the big bonefish don't like a fly jumping.
No, they do not.
That's why we always fished a crab, and we always slid it just like you're talking about, and creating that little mud that the crab is deploying when it's sliding along the bottom. Maybe in other areas of the world, like the Bahamas, fishing a shrimp pattern, they might like to see it bump a little bit. But also, too, with tarpon. If I wanted to show a fly to a tarpon, let's just say I cast that fly a little bit long of his path. Harry, one of our mentors, he used to say, sweep that fly into position with your rod tip. Don't strip it in, because that fish might see that fly jumping out there and they might duck it. But he always taught me how to present the fly in a soft, easy manner. And once they see it, then you start feeding that fish. So like a bonefish, those big bonefish, we always, like you, if they were tailing, once that head is down, then put the fly in there. As soon as he looks up, it was all about the slide. And quite often, I used to, early when I was fishing for those big fish, when I'd see that fish tail down, and I'd feel him when I'd strip strike, I'd feel it just get a little bit tight. I'd go to the rod, and if I went too aggressively, I'd pull that fly out of there if he missed the fly. But if you strip strike and you feel that fish and you go to set it, and all of a sudden that fly's loose, the fly still is in his face. So then you can slide it again and get a second bite.
It's funny. That's absolutely correct. The only difference is back in the 70s, when you occasionally would pull it out, the fish was doing donuts trying to find it.
You could throw it back in there.
Toss it right back in there. And then it was like, so it was just, it was a lot easier in the 70s to do that. But, I got lucky. Like I said, I was able to fish with quite a few good people, Jimmy. And then I fished a lot with Flip. And he was so good. And Flip and I used to fish quite a bit. I'd go up and stay at his house, and we'd go up to different parts of Key Largo.
Right.
Flip taught me a lot of Key Largo. But he took me one day to this place called Whitmore Bight. And I think I was probably only 15 at the time. And we were up there throwing, and he'd let me throw first. And Flip was just so elegant with his cast, slow. You've talked, he's just
the prettiest caster.
Oh my gosh, just slow and precise. And they were everywhere. And I ended up catching, if I'm not mistaken, I think I caught 9, and he caught 11. And the 2 that I couldn't get to eat were the 2 that he beat me with those 11. And, he had a knack. But again, he used to tell me, Glenn, what's the fish doing? Figure out what the fish is doing, because, you read them, and he says, that's going to set you in any other fish you want to catch on the flats. You need to understand it. And that's kind of been my thing, from bone fishing to tarpon fishing. Again, most people get too caught up and they throw the cast, and they're watching their fly and everything else. I don't do that. I put the fly where hopefully it's supposed to go. And then by what I'm doing, I'm watching what the fish is doing.
Right.
Because if the fly's where it's supposed to be, watch the fish. And the fish is going to tell you, one, did he duck because you did something wrong? Did he light up on it and run up on it and then didn't finish it? You did something wrong. I'm just one of those people that believe these things want to eat. And if you put it where it needs to be and you really pay attention to what the fish is doing, you're going to have better shots, better opportunities to make them eat. But, back to the bone fishing, we spent just every waking moment on the flats. Like I said, I started going with Ricky because Doug Hyman liked to redfish. Mike wasn't always there because he was in the reef, but I ran into Ricky Moeller, and Ricky just loved to bonefish. So Ricky and I, as we were kids, Ricky was a year younger than I am, I used to go down. I had just a little boat, a McKee craft with a 65 on it. And we basically started staking out and looking at Florida Bay. We fished everywhere downtown. Then we got up to Steamboat. We took Steamboat to the north out to Crab Key. We took Crab Key to, over to Crane Key, then up Panhandle, down there to Twin Key and Gopher Keys. And we just fished that whole circuit over to Green Mangrove and back down Peterson, and that was our area. And we just fished that over and over and over again. And we learned it, together. And we learned it really, really well to know which tide we wanted to be, the temperature of the water, when we would do it, when we weren't. This time of the year, we wouldn't go if we still saw those stupid little brown ducks. Do you ever see those little cold water ducks in Florida Bay? They're little bitty brown ones. This time
I'm
of year
sure
with
I
the water,
have.
as long as we could see those ducks, we didn't bonefish because we knew the water was still too cold. But we went out all the time. I mean, we just spent so much time on the water. Ricky was plug casting, I was fly fishing.
Oh, I was going to ask, could you talk about, your earlier start to bone fishing? You were throwing millies, bucktail jigs. When did the fly fishing, switch come on and said, I want to start fly fishing for these?
Well, Gary Ellis again was a pretty good influence on me. And there was a couple of Shakespeare reps down there back in the day. I think maybe a Pfluger rep and whatnot. So Gary said to me, would you ever think about the fly fishing? And I think I was only 13 or 14 at the time because I was really into plug fishing. I mean, it was a blast, plug fishing. And I said, sure. So he gave me one of those old white Shakespeare fly rods. It was 9 feet tall. It looked like a push pole. Do you ever see those giant old fiberglass white fly rods?
I think I have.
No,
yeah.
back in the day, I was out in Colorado skiing.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think I have an old
haven't
photos.
seen.
Oh,
I hadn't
my
seen a
gosh.
saltwater fish yet.
This thing was so big, and we didn't have much reels. So, like I said, I brought you a couple of reels that I used. This was actually my first reel that I put on that rod, and I was telling your dad how
It's an old medalist.
it's an old, it's a South
Hold
Bend.
hold that up a little bit to the
Yeah,
camera. Right
it's
there.
an old-
Lefty used to fish bonefish with us, and Joe Brooks.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. There's old photographs with these guys. With,
Gary Ellis gave me this.
old
And
medalists.
yeah, to go with that rod. And I was out throwing, and it's funny, I've still got the backing, little piece of the backing probably back on from the 70s. And I'd hook the fish and it would run, all of a sudden the reel would lock up. And I'm like, what the heck? Because I kept breaking them off. I'm thinking this isn't good. So we took the reel off, and we're looking at it, and we noticed that it's just got this little plastic, maybe ceramic type drag plate right here, that black drag plate.
Right.
And what was going on is the reel was spinning so fast with the bonefish. Because remember, these weren't little bonefish. We're talking 10-pound bonefish. That it was actually heating that disc up, and it was causing this to grab and grab and grab, and we kept breaking them off. So we just decided, what the heck? So we went in my mom's kitchen, or my stepmother's kitchen, and we got the aluminum foil. And we started cutting little discs. And we put 3 or 4 or 5 discs until it stopped the heat. We'd punch it over this and put it back together. And the aluminum foil would absorb the heat. So it wouldn't, the drag was a lot looser than you'd want.
Right.
Because the aluminum foil was, hindering that. But it worked. And it worked really, really well. So, I used this for quite a bit of time. But once Gary gave me that and started me on that path, there was pretty much no looking back for me. And again, like I said, I was very lucky to have different reps that seemed to see me catching a few fish and asked me if I would consider using this or using that.
So, what age did you move from the plug rod to
14,
the fly rod?
14.
And then you were done with the plug.
I keep the plug rod with me when I would go out to Florida Bay for snook and redfish, because we used to fish a lot of that up in Eagle's Nest Island, up in Little Madeira Bay.
Right.
But whenever I was bone fishing at that point, I'd have a fly rod in the boat.
Let's go back to Flip very briefly. You said you used to fish a lot with Flip. What in specific did he teach you other than just fish with him and show you great fishing?
He taught me patience that I did not have.
How would he express that?
He'd say, Glenn, slow down. You got to take it slow. Bone fishing is about, look around you. Look how pretty this is. This is about, you've got to fit into their world, because you can't come charging in on a bank and expect that you're going to make these fish happy. They weren't really big fish up at Whitmore. They were, 7, 8, 9s. And I say that now.
Big
now,
fish for now, yeah.
Now that's a big fish. But back in the day, there were just so many of those. And he just said, look, I want to watch your stroke. I want you to calm it down. Take it easy. I want the fly to hit, land a little softer. So he basically just took me from a rough, jamming.
Hyper
Yeah, I was
testosterone-filled young kid.
I was a nutcase to, as I was wading, because Flip and I waded a lot.
Right.
I was throwing wakes worse than the boat was. He's like, stop moving.
Well, I remember after you won the 95 Fall Fly the year before I won it, and I was asking Craig Brewer, whom was your guide, I said, what was it like fishing with Glenn? Everybody knows you're the best bone fisherman on the planet. You're the best tarpon fisherman on the planet. Nobody could beat you. He said, I'd just take Glenn to, Tavernier, and he'd jump out of the boat and go catch a bunch of fish.
Well, it was funny for that year, because we had just won the Gold Cup with Paul. And my last one, and Brewer calls me. He says, "Flutie, what are you doing?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "My angler dropped out for the Fall Fly. You like that tournament, don't you?" I said, "Sure, but I haven't bonefished in forever."
But you've won it 3 times. Why did you fish it so intermittently and not consecutively?
Well, the very first one that I fished, let's go back to that because that was exciting.
You were like 16 when you
I
won
was
your first
16 in
tournament.
76. I'd fished with Flip quite a bit, and I was really bonefishing quite a bit, but we didn't have any money, Andy. It was,
So it was a price thing to get into the tournaments and paying for guides.
and I was in school. Remember, it happened in September. We were in school. So, Flip says, "You really should do this. Come on, do this. I can get you into this tournament. Why don't you come do it?" And Lopez said, "Come on, Klein, come do the tournament." So I didn't have a guide. And Tony Lay was just a friend of the family's. And Tony had his license. And my dad talked to Tony. And Tony said, "Sure, I'll fish him. You just pay expenses." So we were able to do that. And I'll tell you a funny story because I got to the kickoff. And, I was pretty cocky then because I thought, this is going to be fun, these guys. But I'm in this room with all these super wealthy guys, I'm like that little street rat at the, didn't have any money, just kind of hung around and did his thing. And I'm amongst all these people. Carl Navarre was there because, the banquet was at Chica and all these big guys. And they were very nice to me. But I'll never forget, they did a Calcutta back then. This was a 5-day tournament back then. And it came to me and nobody was bidding on me. And I was pissed. I'm thinking, nobody's bidding on me.
It's like Steve Huff, the first time he entered a Gold Cup, he sold for like $35. He said,
Really?
"Oh, stick this right up their ass."
No, I think the first bid or something was 60 cents. I think he said that.
Yeah.
So I was so pissed. And then I think my dad ended up buying me. Now I went from pissed to utterly embarrassed. And Flip walks up to
What
me.
did Dad pay to get you?
I think he paid like $125 or $100, which was a lot of money back then for my dad. And I was pissed. I'm stomping around looking all mopey. And Flip walks up to my table and he says, "What's wrong?" I said, "Nobody freaking bid on me, Flip." I said, "You know how ridiculous that is?" He looks at me and he says, "Why don't you grow up?" I'm like, "Excuse me?" He goes, "Your dad bid on you, okay, because he believes in you. You know what you can do. I know what you can do. Go show the rest of these guys why they should have bid on you." But he did. He said to me, "You just got to stop that right now." He goes, "You look kind of foolish sitting here moping around because nobody bid on you."
So how'd you do?
I won.
You won, yeah.
No, I know that. I'm just.
It was pretty. You know what though? It was really interesting because again, like I said, Jimmy Lopez was in there, and it was a tough week because our boat broke down. I was fishing with his Regal craft, which didn't pull well, and we were right across the street from the old Coral. Was it the old buffet, the Coral Grill in Islamorada? And I'm going on that beach line there, and Tony's poling, and I see a couple bonefish tailing by this dock. And I wait out there, and I'm going on the backside of the dock because they're coming around the dock, these two fish. And all of a sudden, here comes this lady come walking down her dock. And she goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm in a bonefish tournament. I want to catch one." She goes, "You're not going to do that." I'm like, "Why?" She goes, "Those are my pets." I'm like, "They're bonefish. They're not pets." And she says, "You're not going to catch those fish." And I said, "No, I'm in a tournament." She goes, "Okay." She goes back, grabs a couple rocks off the beach, walks back and throws rocks at those bonefish. I'm like, "You've got
Those are my pets.
I'm like, "You got those are your pets you're throwing rocks at?"
If I had one last fish to catch after 40 years of doing this, I think it would be waiting for a big tailing bonefish. I miss that. And who knows when, maybe in Andros we can find that fish, maybe in Caledonia. But that scenario is so organic. Just you, yourself, your mind, the wind, the great sun, and the fish out there, digging holes.
It's funny you'd say that. And I absolutely agree. Tom Siska, is like my brother. Since my brother passed away years ago, Tom was kind of like, he filled in. Him and I have been going to a place called the over there in the Bahamas for the last few years. That's
We'll bleep that name out.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we've been just going to the Bahamas. And he said to me, he goes, "Glenn, it's going to be like it was again when you were a kid. There's so many tailing bonefish there. Now, they're not big," he said, "but you're going to have a blast." So I went and I got I bought a Hardy 7-weight, 8-weight, 9-weight, 4-piece. And we went over there, and Andy, I would rather do that than anything else again because it took me back to a time this is the most unique place. You wade through the bushes in the dark, getting destroyed by mosquitoes. It's got little headlamps. You know, Tom's got everything. He's got goodies because there's razor crawl everywhere. So you have to be very careful. You get out right to the water's edge. Now, these fish are anywhere from 2 pounds to 5 pounds. 5 pounds is big. So 2 pounds to 3 to 4, you catch a lot of. I'm standing out there in the dark, and I'm watching the water kind of move, and I'm thinking, what the heck? And as the sun comes up, from me to your desk, there are 3 or 4 tailing bonefish right there. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I just took my fly rod, I went ding, 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 and there
Like
it
a
was.
cane pull.
Yeah, and they ate.
Wow.
So, you know, we've been going over there now for some time. Matter of fact, we're going back, and he's going for 28 days in March, and I'm going to go for 10. But I would rather go wading. Wading is to me, wading takes me back to a time in the Keys when it was good and it was new.
Right.
And these fish over in the Bahamas don't know to be afraid of you. And that's so exciting. Now, we don't fish with barbs because you don't want to, hurt their mouth. And you lose a few because of that. But you're
That's
over there
okay.
throwing 6 weights and 7 weight rods. You get this big bend. A little 3-pound bonefish still fights like a 10-pounder. He'll take you right to your backing. He doesn't know he's only that big.
It's just love to see what they do.
Did you ever dabble in the permit game?
I didn't do much. They were very hard, even back when I was a kid, to catch. They didn't tail very much. I caught more mutton snapper on flies in Ocean Reef than I ever did permit because they would tail right on the back of the stingrays.
Right.
But, I've caught a few. As a matter of fact, the one bonefish tournament, the second fall fly I won in 81 or 82, I won with Skip Paxton. And again, we were up at Whitmore Bight. And bonefish were tailing all over the place. And he had an old Willie Roberts, so he couldn't get in too close. So I had to get out. And I'm wading the shoreline. And all of a sudden, I look out to the left. I heard a splash, a big splash. And I see a permit tailing. And I'm walking that way. And Skip's like, don't do it. We're not in I know this isn't a permit tournament. Don't do it. I'm like, oh, you know what I got? I have to. I'm waiting out there. And he goes, you hook it. I'm not coming to help you. Because I'm like, well, you can't get your boat in here anyway. What difference does it make? So sure enough, I threw out there and I hooked it and I caught. That was my first permit on a fly. It was about 12 pounds. That was so cool that he wouldn't even take a picture of it. He said, there's bonefish tailing everywhere and you're throwing for a stupid permit. But that was my first permit. But even after that, something about bonefish I didn't want to leave it.
So how'd you gravitate towards the tarpon?
Well, Billy Pate used to fish the bonefish tournaments too, back in the day. And Billy used to say to me all the time, come on, Flutie, it's time you man up and start doing tarpon. I used to say, well, Billy, tarpon are for people who can't catch bonefish, so why would I want to do that?
Had you caught tarpon yet? When
Only
this
a
conversation
couple.
took place?
A couple. Gary Ellis had shown me a little spot up in Manatee over by the islands, and I went in there with my bonefish fly rod, these little flies, and I would catch little bitty dudes.
Sure.
But during that period, Jimmy Lopez and I used to fish. He used to take me out, and I'd pull him around for like $50 for a few hours. We go back in the back of Rabbit Key Basin, and I think he was searching for a record on 12. And I would watch him throw and hook up and break off fish that it's not big enough. I'm like, how big do you want? This thing is huge. Because it's got to be like 120 or something. I'm like, so I used to do that, and I thought, God, these things, as soon as they throw a fly, they eat. That's like no big deal. So I never did it. And finally, Mike Carrier, again, for my birthday, we used to take each other birthday bone fishing or whatnot. And he says, we're not going bone fishing this year. I'm taking you tarpon fishing. I'm like, really? I said, okay. So he booked Harry. And this was in 91.
Harry Spear.
Or actually it was in 1990. And we went down to and fished at, the whole Sugarloaf area. And that was really exciting. And, and Michael, we kept hooking them and they kept falling off because, we were setting like bonefish and Harry's just laughing at us. And I hooked a couple and just had a blast. And on the way home, Harry said, would you ever consider thinking about doing a tarpon tournament? I said, well, Harry, I don't know. It's tarpon. He goes, no, really, we should do that. I think you'd enjoy it. I said, but you saw I couldn't keep money. He goes, I can fix that for you. That's what he said. He goes, I can fix that for you. So I said, okay. So we didn't do a lot of practicing right before that. Actually, it might have been, it was my birthday in January. So we fished February. So that June, we fished that first Gold Cup.
Which was in 92.
I won in 92. It was in 91.
Okay, so your first year
First year I fished with Harry, I did not win. So I'm out there, and I used to always say to my dad,
I thought you fished 5 tournaments, won 5 tournaments.
No.
So you had 1 year to warm up.
I won 1 year to warm up. So it was so funny. So we went out on a practice day, and he said, I'm going to show you where we're going to go. I said, okay. So he took me up into back in the day when it was just fly fishing only. There was only us and Steve Huff up there. And he took me to this spot, which I know you fished enough. Remember that as you come into, there's that big dark spot. It was like about a 50-yard circle. And these fish would just lay up on this. They would roll up, and then they would just slowly sink, and you could see the bubbles. He goes, this is where we're coming tomorrow. I'm like, okay, this is great. So I said, this should be like taking candy from a baby. I said, they're freaking everywhere. Are you kidding? Yeah, I said, we're going to smoke everybody, Harry. It's not going to be fair. He goes, okay, just calm down, calm down.
We'll see.
Yeah, well, that's what he said. So we get out there, and I'm throwing, they're eating, I'm setting up, tarpon are flying, hooks are flying back at the boat, fly lines tangling everybody. I mean, I am just everywhere. And I think that we hooked 11 and had 11 bites.
That's
and
incredible.
every one fell off. And I got back home that afternoon, and I'm sitting at my dad's table, and he comes in and he says, what's wrong? And I said, yeah, Dad, remember how I told you that bonefish were for people who couldn't catch tarpon? And he goes, yeah, why? And I said, I must be a great bone fisherman because I suck at tarpon. He goes, what do you mean? I said, I couldn't keep any of these things on. And it went like that the whole week. And finally, the last day, this is when it was a kill tournament. The last year was a kill tournament. I finally hooked one. We're at Sugarloaf. And you've been there before when you've seen, I don't know, Andy, it looked like a 1/4 mile of a string of fish going down in front of the all the way down. And I'm throwing and I'm throwing and I'm throwing and I'm throwing. We change flies over and over again. Finally, Harry switches to something. I throw to the last fish, Nikki, that was in the entire thing, and he ate. So I set up on him. So I'm all freaked out. This thing's only about, I think 90 pounds. And I'm just going like, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Harry's like, you're not pulling. I'm like, I am. And he goes, you're not pulling. He finally shut the motor off. He said, you're either going to pull it or you're going to lose it.
And that's how you learned how to pull on tarpon.
Well, no. He goes, I just somehow got it to the boat, and we killed it, unfortunately, he had a body bag. And as excited as I was to catch it, I hated seeing that fish on the back of our boat.
Right.
Because we had to bring it to the dock back then. So I ended up placing 4th. I beat Tom Sisk out as new angler that year. So he said, okay, Flutie, no more of this. I'm going to set you on a path now that you've got to just do this. From now on, no more bone fishing. 12 weight is your rod. A 12 weight is your arm. You don't do anything that doesn't include a 12 weight. He taught me how to take a scale, tie it to a tree, tie leaders, put a piece of tape over like 8 pounds, 10 pounds, and 12 pounds. And he said, I want you to pull to your left. And he said, how much do you think you're pulling? I said, I don't know. That's a lot. And he says, 3 pounds. Pull to your right. And I pulled, and he got me to the point where I was pulling 8 to 10 pounds every time. I could feel it. I could go against the tape. And I knew it. He says, from December until the tournament every year, I don't want you doing anything but practicing.
Did he teach you at that time how to hang on to your fly line to create resistance?
Well, that was step 2. There were several steps to this process that he gave me. I mean, he really put me on a weird path, to doing this, but I trusted him.
Right.
Because he knew, I didn't know anything about this. So yeah, first was the pull to figure out where it was, so that you could go, and we did it at like 40 feet, 60 feet, and 80 feet. He did it at 80 feet to prove to me why you should never try to throw at 80 feet and try to hook a tarpon at 80 feet. Because there's so much stretch in your line that you're going to get a third more stretch at that distance than you would if you waited. So yeah, so I got to the point where I knew where it was, and I could, with my finger and hold it and get it there and everything else. Then he said, now we're going to practice on hook set. So again, I'd hook, and then I would pull until I would break my tippet. Pull till I would break my tippet. Get it to the point and try to really pull and break the tippet. So after that, he said, you found that? And I said, yes. He goes, so you're never going to do that again. All you're going to do is, I don't ever want to see you go bunk, bunk, bunk anymore. I want to see you strip down, comes tight. You strip one more time, and you hold that rod, and then you just slowly make that big bend all the way back here, and you just hold that fish. Mm-hmm. He said, you just let that fish sit there, wiggle his head, do what he has to do, because Harry would, he'd hone that 34007 to like a razor blade.
Bend the barb down.
Yeah, he said it'll set itself if you just hold it. Then he said, and then after that, too many people make the mistake of worrying about how do you clear the line. He said so many people, all they want to do is after they hook it, they're looking down trying to figure out, how do I get all this line away from me? How do I do that? And he goes, I don't ever want to see you do that again. I did that. He goes, what I want you to do is you hold it, you hold that line out with your left hand, you hold the fish, and you make the fish take the line. If the fish doesn't want to take the line, don't try to give it to him.
Right.
Don't throw line
A
at
lot of
it.
times they don't even leave the fly line.
That's what he told you, Dad. Isn't that
Well, what
correct?
he said, don't give him the fly line.
Make him take it.
Earn it.
Yep.
But the thing is, what I learned later on is that once you know that that fish is hooked,
Yep.
and you hold him, because that big head slashing, that 40-pound head, that's helping seat that hook.
Yep.
But once you've got him and he takes off, you're not going to stop him.
That's right.
So there's no sense in trying to make him earn any more line.
Nope.
Because at that point, if you just clear that fly line with a finger and a thumb lightly, that fly line comes off the deck of the boat and goes out with no bouncing. But if you hang on to that fly line,
Oh, no, it's jerking all over the place.
friction
Yeah.
will have that fly line looking for your head to wrap around. And I think that's one of the biggest problems people have is that they're so excited about hooking a big fish that they don't want to let it go.
And don't you notice that they're looking down at the line instead of looking at the fish and the rod tip to make sure you're not doing that?
But I disagree with that
Okay.
in the fact that I don't need to look at the fish. I need to look at my line to make sure it's not tangled on anything. And many times I'll look down and realize that fly line I might be stepping inside that fly line, or it might be wrapped around maybe another rod or something in the, near the cooler. And if my eyes are on the fish, I won't see that. And quite often your guide will too tell you, hey, your fly line's wrapped. You're wrapped around the fly line, So when I look down, once I get the fish hooked, I need to find out whether or not I'm good to go to let that fly line clean.
And then fighting the fish, you're well known for fighting them off the drag. You don't touch your fly line.
Well, I didn't
correct?
start out that way,
Okay.
but my Harry said to me, "We got to change what you're doing because, I never felt comfortable doing that with my finger because too many times, the fish can do something really weird. So we'll step back on that. Harry taught me my next thing after I hooked the fish to clear the line, and then the next thing was how much bend I keep in my rod at all the time and how to fight the fish. So." I would always reel down on him and then, pull him back and reel down on him.
But when you pull back, you're pulling back with your hands on the fly line.
I was at that time. Yes, I was. I had my my index finger on that, pulling him back. And what I found is Harry taught me, don't bow to the fish. Now, it's not your normal bow. We still do give him a little bit of the rod, but I used to tell him we're going to walk the dog. Tarpon comes up, he starts doing his head. Don't throw lines straight at him. We never did that.
Don't give them slack.
But don't give him slack.
Yeah.
You take that big bend that you had, you maybe decrease it by 50%, and you just kind of do this.
There's still a bend in the rod tip.
Still
I
a
agree
bend,
with you,
just
yeah.
letting
Yeah.
the tip take the resistance. Don't pull. Let the tip take the resistance.
Yeah.
Let him fall back, and then as he's going back in the water, a lot of times
Lay him down.
I'll lay him and he'll just start coming right back at him again. The minute he hits the water, we start doing that. But I still never felt comfortable doing that. And we won the first Gold Cup. But the second one, I decided to do something different. And I took my...
Oh, as if that didn't work. As if winning didn't work.
But
we got to fix winning.
But it didn't feel right yet. So I did the same routine every year I would do on my Chatinian skill, but now I took my finger off of it and decided to start setting my drag to find out where that 8, 10, and 12 pounds were. Mm-hmm. I wanted to get to the point where I kept 12 pounds on that fish after I felt I had him under control. Now, when he's clearing the boat, like we're talking about, I'm using about 2 pounds, Andy.
But here's the question with that reel that you had, because that drag knob had to be turned a number of times to get to 12 pounds of resistance.
Yes,
Whereas
it
the
did.
new reels now, like a Hardy or like a Mako,
And they're
you
wonderful.
go 0 to 100% in one revolution, so you can mark the drag knob in the back of the reel encasing, so you know exactly where 8, 10, or 12 pounds is. So how did you know where 12 pounds was?
Pulled it with my hand. I'm so used to working.
It was just
on my
muscle
scale.
memory.
It was so used to working
So
off to the
you were
side.
kind of guessing with feel.
Once I got to the point, and my kids, it was so funny. I used to call my oldest daughter my tarpon. I said, Amanda, it's time to go play tarpon. So she knew to hold the scale while I was doing that. And I'd say, okay, where am I now? And she'd say, you're at the 8. Where am I now? You're at the 10. she found where I was at the 12. So I got really good at knowing where 8, 10, and 12 were on this. And when I knew it was there, I would then also feel what it felt like coming off the reel. So that I knew that as I'm going, if it's going a little too much, I could give it a tug, and I know I just needed to just offset it. Because back then I was using my Able reels at that, back in those days. And it was you had to know where you were at, like what you said. So I was really comfortable about doing that. Now understand, I didn't do that until I had that fish to where I would consider 30 feet from the boat.
And he wasn't going to jump anymore. He's too tired?
He was too tired. Now he might get up and do one of those but very rarely would they ever do one of those acrobatic, things. You
can't do that when you're tired.
Yeah. So I would get him up that. And again, when they would do that, I would let him come up, do his thing. And then I would just go right back. But one thing that I would do different than a lot of people do, and I still do it, which is different than a lot of people do. You and I fished near each other at times out on some of those big fish, but we've been far enough away where you can't see me. If I'm doing that and I'm pulling real hard and he starts to do that, his thing, I don't want to reel back down on him. What I do is I get the line and I strip back down on him until I get that big bend in the rod again. Then I will clamp with my forefinger on the rod and then just hit the reel and bring that line right back on that reel.
What's the difference between just reeling down as opposed to what you just did?
It's just a comfort level. I don't think it's anything more than a feel.
But don't you think that's dangerous? Because once that fly line is on the reel, you've eliminated the possibility of that fly line grabbing a reel handle or the butt section of your rod. So when you strip that again,
it's never that much that I'm stripping.
So you just have like 3 feet
max. If that is ever all it is, it's just enough to get me right back. Because what I want to do is I almost want to grab it and put it right back here and get it right back low again, and then I'll just hit the spool to get it right back there.
Here's one of the things I want to make mention to people that are listening to this conversation is that it's very important, like what you said. You do not get 12 pounds of drag on your reel until that fish is extremely tired and fatigued. And the reason being, if anybody starts fishing with 12 pounds of drag, now let's not forget, a fish in the water column, if it's not swimming, kicking, just laying there, that 100-pound fish weighs less than 10% of its body weight. So that fish might weigh 8 to 10 pounds. That's why children can hold their parents in a swimming pool. The buoyancy of salt water is even more so than fresh. But what happens is, if you've got 10 or 12 pounds of drag on your reel and you hook that fish, and now that green fish jumps out of the water, now that fish is not 10 pounds, it's 100 pounds.
Yep.
And if that 100-pound fish lands on your 16-pound test tippet, he's going to break it. That's why it is imperative not to have a lot of drag on your reel early in the fight against a big fish.
I never do. Like I said, it's all about again, reading what that fish is doing at that time. Because sometimes like you say, if you get a really hot fish, you got to be very careful. But when I finally start getting that fish, the minute I start to fight a fish, because I know we do it a little bit different, Harry taught me down and dirty, down and dirty, down and dirty, especially with the backcountry fish. I start getting that thing the minute he might be out 60 feet, and I'll stop him out there at 60 feet because I can, start to feel him slow down. I immediately then, I turn my thing up to about 8 pounds, and I just start going straight down his tail. Now, before I do that, I always find out which side of the mouth he's hooked on.
Right.
I want to fight the fish always on the same side that he's hooked. I don't want to cross him. I don't like the way it does it. Sometimes it'll turn the fish, or it'll cause your leader to rip across his mouth, the shock and break it off.
Yeah.
So we stay on that side, but I immediately start going down. Now, Harry would tell me, do not flip him, because we would go ahead and keep pulling him back. But now all of a sudden, when he's only about, a boat length from the boat, now I'll really start to pull him down hard. And as his head starts to go down, then I would turn and I'd come straight back up. I would try to get him going down and then flip him back up.
He does a headstand.
He does a handstand. Then his head, his mouth comes up. And here's the biggest mistake most people make. They don't finish the fight. When that fish sticks his head up, then I get up by that time, I'm up on top of the casting platform. My guide's ready to do whatever he's going to do to the fish. And a lot of times then, I will then immediately, when I get him up tight, I don't try to reel down. I keep his head up, and now I'm stripping again. I'm pulling my line, and I'm actually pulling that fish back to my guide, keeping his head up. You let him put his head back in, you might be in for another 20 minutes.
Yeah, you got to own their head.
But you get that head out of the water, and you can slide him. We pancake him sideways. And when you pancake him sideways, too many people still swim him to the boat. I keep his head up, and I'm leading that freaking pilcher right to the lip gaff or the guy going to grab him. And if you don't, you could prolong it. And in a tournament, it's about getting that thing out as quick as possible.
Another technical aspect I want to talk about is my father made mention that you don't necessarily make, a backhand cast, but you go right over your head with a forehand cast, correct?
I do. I don't do back casts well. I learned on some of the areas that you and I fish, way out west, that you might have to make an emergency back cast. But as a rule, I turn and I throw straight over my head if I have to.
With the fly line between the boat.
The fly line straight over my shoulder.
Right.
And, I learned to do that because I just wasn't a very good backcaster. I fished with some people like Craig Brewer. He backcasts as good as anybody could forward cast. But I just don't do that. So if I see a fish, I might flip it out one way and then I'll just turn and I'll go straight over my head right to it.
And or that rod tip can be over your opposite shoulder and your head is between your hand, the rod, and the fly line. So you just go right over your head.
But you got to be careful because it freaks out a lot of guides when they see the fly flying through the middle of them. Like, you stand still and I won't hit you.
Yeah, just trust this.
Yeah, but
a lot of guys don't have anglers of your caliber. One of the great things about a backhand cast is that you can hook the fly, and you can't do that with a rod over your head. So what happens is,
I wish I could do it.
But I'm just saying that if you have that dexterity in your casting, and you get a fish lying away from you, and the boat's on the slight left-hand shoulder, you can backhand cast low and stop that rod tip. That fly will flip around right in front of the fish, and you can't do that with a cast over your shoulder. But that happens so infrequently.
Yeah, it's so funny. I'll tell you another story. We were in second Gold Cup that we won with Harry, and I had the flu. I mean, I was sick. So we get in that first morning, and sure enough, there's a big one. Boom, get him. I think we ended up taping. It was like 128, and I'm sitting there over the side of the boat throwing up. And Harry's like, "You gonna be okay?" And I'm like, "I don't know why." He goes, "Because you got to get up." I'm like, "Why?" And he goes, "Because there's more fish right in front of the boat." I'm like, oh my gosh. So we get it. I think it was another one like 132. And I'm fighting the fish and throwing
What's up with you and these big monster fish?
Well,
Jesus
Well, let's
Christ.
go back to the tournament. You beat Nicky. You catch 2, he catches 7, and you still win.
Yeah, well,
because you're the guy who catches big fish.
You
Caught a 145 on the second day.
Yeah. Craig is so funny. He calls us the big fish bitch.
Yeah.
But the size of those fish in back in the day.
Oh yeah.
And they were monsters.
Right.
And
the ones that swim down the.
We'll beep that out.
Yeah, well, we won't even look at those. But it's a funny story back then. So we're there, and I'm looking around again, and Harry goes, I hear somebody going, psst, psst. I'm thinking, what the heck is that? I said, Harry, is that okay? He goes, and he's pulling this way, but he's looking over his shoulder. He goes, behind the boat. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, there's a tarpon right behind the boat. He'll start to throw, and I'm like, really? And he goes, yeah. So I start to throw, and the line goes over Harry and lands on his shoulder. Finally lands on his shoulder. He goes, strip it. I'm like, are you sure? And he goes, yeah. Strip. One eats it, jumps, and immediately falls off because it jumped right at Harry.
Oh shit.
Yeah, and he laughed, and I said, I can't believe we lost it. He goes, it doesn't matter. The line landed on me. It would have been disqualified anyway.
Oh right.
Yeah, because it was on the
It
was on the
Touch him.
I didn't
Yeah.
think of that.
So then we were in another one. You'll love this. We're out back, and I mean, when I tell you I did whatever Harry told me to do, we're fishing somewhere back in the back, way down in Key West, near some island. You probably fished out there, I don't know. And they're like big mounds, and the tarpon are laying up around the mound. And I hooked one. This again was during the Gold Cup, and it's a big one, man. And he's jumping all over the place. And I mean, the minute I hooked him, he, big fish a lot of times won't just go crazy. This fish went bananas. So of course the fly line is everywhere. Just what I told you I never do. Fly line is everywhere. So it comes up and it's got this big knot. And I'm like, Harry, what do I do? What do I do? And he goes, jump. I'm like, jump? He goes, jump. So I just leaped right off the bow of the boat. I'm swimming like this with a fly rod, and he's not moving. He's laughing. I'm like, what? Come get me. He goes, you just disqualified us. You can't jump out of the boat.
Why not?
I don't know. And I guess
I disagree with that.
I don't know.
No one touched the rod.
No
Who
one
says you got to stay in the boat?
So he just started laughing. Well, the fish broke off
Anyway,
because
right.
I couldn't keep up with him.
Right.
But he laughed. He goes, "You can't jump out of it." I said, "What you told me to."
I know. I've done
He
that a
said,
couple
"We've got to
of
put
times.
some boundaries on what we do on this."
I was in the Golden Fly the first year I fished with Paul Tejera, and we were on the ocean. I hooked this fish, and all of a sudden it came up, and the line got wrapped around the butt of my rod, and I just jumped in midair. I tried to get it off, and Tejera had never seen it. He goes, What the hell? All of a sudden you were just gone. What's that all about?
No, you mentioned Paul Tahir. I wanted to talk a little bit about him because you fished with him for many years, and you guys did
You won your last Gold Cup
We won the
together.
last Gold Cup, yeah.
very well together. How was it fishing with Paul? Because he's such a good friend of ours.
Paul is one of the, Paul's a great guy, and he's a fabulous guy. And it's funny because I was just going to mention something that happened with Paul and I. We're at the first point in 9 Mile, and we hooked a big fish. We've got him pretty good, everything else, and the fish ran back up into the bank, and he's only in about 3 feet of water, and he won't open his mouth. He just won't open his mouth. And I'm like, Paul's down there trying to get the little lip calf, and I'm like, dude, grab him, do something, grab him, go the other way,
Hurry.
do something. And the fish is throwing water all over Paul, and finally he gets the fish, he lip casts, and he turns and he goes, don't tell me what to do anymore. He goes, you bring the fish to me, I'll put the fish in the boat. I said, well,
The problem is you had a guide too.
I'm like, put the fish in the boat. Let's just do it. We had so much fun. I mean, it was funny because that was a tough Gold Cup for us. We stayed in Islamorada because of some of the people that were chirping about, well, you're going down south. We don't know what's going on or not. So, our last Gold Cup, Harry and I stayed in Islamorada too, which I wasn't happy about, but we did. And we won in front of Ralph Delph and everybody right at the first point in 9 Mile. We stayed there in Buchanan. But
Well, you put all those guys into retirement. They couldn't beat you, so they started the Golden Fly.
Well,
And
yeah.
that's a true story.
yeah, that was funny. So
Whoa, is that really?
It's a
true?
true story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you guys were accused of cheating.
well, what
because
they said,
because I think were in.
Yep.
By the time you guys got to, you'd stopped at Channel Key Banks,
And
you
we'd
guys
already caught
you
one.
caught one there.
Yep, we did.
And they thought nobody could catch a fish that fast, but you guys can. I said because I didn't say that to Steve and Sandy. But in my mind, I'm thinking, these guys are the best tarpon fishing team on the planet. Of course they can catch a fish in 15, 20 minutes.
That was very hurtful because we were on our way down and Harry stopped because, Harry lived in Duck Key at the time.
Sure.
I had never fished Channel Key Banks before. And Harry says, we're going to stop here real quick. I said, why? And he goes, because I've been finding fish in these little channels. I mean, they're literally a series of channels in Channel Key Bank. So we're on the edge of the channel and there's a few fish rolling. He said, just throw it there, let it sink, bump, bump. That's how we used to do that. Bump, bump, pause, bump, bump, pause. All of a sudden, just boom. I hooked one up. Fish went bump, 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 jumped, got it to the boat. I think he was like 112.
Dredging.
Yeah, dredging pretty much. Got him right to the boat, got rid of him, and then we took off and went down south. And the funny thing that really bothered me about that is we'd always go through Bahia Honda Bridge on our way to because we'd see those balls of fish that used to be there. And Harry,
On the bay side.
no, on the ocean side. We'd go
Oh,
through.
you'd go the ocean side.
We'd go the ocean side and come around. Come in from that. Remember that little creek at the.
Oh, that's right. Because at that point, the inside was already, you had to go way back.
You had to go way
You
back.
around. So at that point, you go out to the ocean.
Yep, and we go out to the ocean and we go through that little side creek going into Coupon there.
Right.
So we came out there and we try to find those. We never hooked one of those in the balls. Never. And we tried every time. So we ran down there and we ran straight.
Skip the balls.
Yeah, we skipped the balls and ran straight to because he wanted to be there on the falling tide. Sure enough, when we got there, we'd come in from the Islamorada end. Remember the little creek that would come in from that side? And we could see Huff and Sandy down there where they always fished at Huff's Corner down at the far end by Bow Channel.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think we might have caught another fish there or whatnot, or maybe we didn't. But when we got in, there was this big hoopla about it's impossible that you could have caught a fish and still gotten down there by the time we saw you. And I'm like, this is just so ridiculous. I don't even know how to respond to this because we did. We stopped. We hooked a fish. So, we had a little bit of that type of controversy that really bothered both Harry and I. And I talked to my wife about it. And, my wife is a good little Christian girl, but she said, screw them. It's not their fault that you guys are winning. Well, the next year, Harry decided, you know what? We're either going to win in front of everybody in Islamorada or we're going to lose. And I was pissed because I was like, no, I want to go back down south. I love it down there.
He wanted to make a point.
He wanted to say enough's enough. It's time to prove these
Watch
people
this.
wrong. And we did. And the weather was freaking horrible that week. It was blowing 30 and raining. And we sat at the first point in 9 Mile. We were up at the Green Holes. Ralph Delph was right behind us at that spot. And Jeff Combs was at the other end. And it's blowing so hard, Nick, you can't even do a back cast. So I was practicing, and all I was doing was stripping all my line out, doing a roll cast and shooting it up in the air, and the wind just was like, zoom, take it out, and it would like boink. And we're standing there, and it's raining so hard. And all of a sudden, I look coming down outside of us. I'm like, Harry, is that a tarpon? And all you could see was like a little tweak coming across the water.
Right.
Because it was blowing so hard. And he goes, it might be.
Surface disturbance, right?
A little bit of it, just a little surface. So I throw it out as far as I could. He goes, Glenn, you overshot the thing like 40 feet. I'm like, it's blowing 30. Strip, 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 strip. Whoosh. There he is. So we fight this fish. We're off into the you can't even see us anymore. We can't see the bank because it's raining that hard. We catch that fish and we come back and we're looking around thinking, where's our push pole? Because I know we left it there, and there's Dolph and there's Jeff. Well, they moved up. Dolph was on our push pole.
What is your spot?
Yeah, and Chris Martin was sitting on our push pole. So everybody moved back, and we weren't there 15 minutes. And here comes another little ting, 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 ting. And I throw back out again. We get that one, and there we're off again. And it was a blast.
And they ran home and started the Golden Fly.
So that was your 4th Gold Cup win.
That was the 4th Gold Cup win.
And the icing on the cake, obviously, was with you and Paul the following week.
Yeah. Well, that was, again, Paul really wanted to stay down there. But Paul and I were fishing, and it was a little tough. But we were at 9 Mile. We were catching some good fish at 9 Mile. And Rusty Albury is a good friend of mine. Mentioned, you know what? They're moving First National like you can't believe. He told me that night, and I told Paul, and he said, the problem is, people are going to beat you out there. We were last out. And he said, all the fish are coming in from the Gulf down First National. So just get at the very end, the Rocky Channel end, and just sit and wait. And you might get some shots. Okay, so we go out there. Everybody's like 4 boats out there. Rusty, Randy Towell. Randy was fishing with Carlos Solis at the time. All these boats are out there. We're standing there thinking, God, this might suck, because we're the last boat. Well, all of a sudden, all the tarpon in the world started coming from Rocky Channel instead of coming in from the Gulf.
So you get the head
They were
first.
coming this way and coming around us. So again, it's raining and windy. We hooked this one fish, and it was a big one. And my able froze up on me. And the drag wouldn't go up by itself. You had to pull the drag out, and the fish was going crazy. So Paul and I'm sitting in the bow of Paul's boat, and every time I'm telling Paul, he's going to go, he'd speed up because I'm trying to pull the thing out. We finally ended up catching it between water spouts out at Middle Bank.
Oh, wow.
Out by the tripod. Mm-hmm. We finally caught that thing.
Oh, my God.
You know how Paul is. You should have heard him like talking to that fish when we finally got that thing to the boat. But,
yeah. Well, look, my question is, you win 5 in a row and then you were done.
Yeah.
Why'd you stop?
Because I won 5 in a row, and I worked really hard at it, and Paul would have fished it again. And quite frankly, I'm glad we stopped, because the next year, I think that's when Timmy Mahaffey went out, him and Murphy, and they destroyed. I think we had like 7,800 points, and they got 8,200 or something.
Right.
So we would have gotten beat most likely anyway. They were fishing, on the far back on the coast side, and it seemed like the right time to stop. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why.
Were you burned out a little bit?
I was, and I'll tell you what it was, Andy. By the last Gold Cup that Harry and I won, my wife and I would talk, because every year, one day during the Gold Cup, I would fall off the rails. I mean, I looked like I couldn't do anything right. I mean, it was horrible. I couldn't, and I'd call up Barbara, and she'd say, "Is this your, your therapy call?" And I said, "Yes, I sucked again today." She goes, "Okay." And her saying was, just fish better. Just stop, forget about it, go out tomorrow, fish better. So that was a joke, just fish better. But I got to the point, after I would win, I would go home, and people used to say I was cocky. It wasn't that. I don't care if you're there, and if you beat me, that means you caught everything that you had a chance to catch, or you caught everything that you had a chance to catch. But if I missed anything, I would dwell on it for weeks after the Gold Cup, to the point where Barbara was like, "You got to stop. This is getting ridiculous. You won." I'm like, "Yeah, but I missed this fish. I did this wrong. I shouldn't have done that." And she, I was really becoming obsessive on the mistakes that I would make.
Can you imagine how depressed you would have been had you lost the Gold Cup? This is when you're winning.
I was going to say, that's what made you so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
the obsessive,
And a lot of people don't have that drive to do it. Some people would, like I said, they called it cockiness, and it really wasn't that at all, because I wasn't fishing against you or anybody else. I was fishing against that fish that swam in front of me. Mm-hmm. If I did my job, and I'm lucky enough to catch one more than the next person, then you can win. And if you don't want to win that bad, I don't want to place second. You know, when we came back and fished the Golden Fly with Steve Thomas, which is another interesting story, I'll tell you that was kind of funny. And the second year we placed second, and that's because, again, I'll tell you that the fish that I broke off that I shouldn't have because I was stupid. But taking second place, I sat there and I thought to myself, I didn't say it, I whispered to Steve, I said, so this is what this feels like. And he said, yeah, well, we're second place. I said, no, we're not. We lost. You know, second place, we lost.
Well, but right after that, you became a guide. Was that? I mean, you're the only person that has ever won the Gold Cup as an angler and as a guide.
I enjoyed being part of that tournament so much, and I got to the point where I just loved tarpon fishing so much, and we discovered the fish out west, and it was just so good that I decided, you know what, I'm going to guide. And then I got hooked up with Tom Siska, and Tom and I fished for, 13 or 17 years. And I just love taking people fishing, Andy. I really enjoy taking people fishing. I don't have to catch the fish to have fun on the back of the boat. And one thing that I want to do now, worse than anything, is just try to see if I can help others maybe improve if they want to improve at all, and see if I can help them become better anglers if it works for them. And that's kind of where I'm really pushing myself now. But I enjoyed that. It was so funny with Tom. We would go out to these places, and as you know, some of these places, you'd see strings coming. There were places we'd fish, Andy, that you'd look down and you'd see streaks of fish coming, 3 different lanes, as far as the eye could see, just wakes coming. And the wakes could have anything from an 80-pounder to a 150-pounder in it, or 10 fish to 30 fish. And it was so exciting. And I could see good. And Tom he'd look at some of these fish, and I'm like, do you see that fish? No, which one are you talking about? I'm like, that one right there. What do you mean you don't see it? This went on for 1 week, quite a bit. So he finally stops, puts his rod down nice and calmly. He walks to the back of the boat, and he says, come here, I gotta tell you something. And I bend over, grabs me, and he says, do you think I have my head in my ass? He goes, if I tell you I don't see it, stop telling me why. Why don't you see it and point it out?
No is no, I don't see it.
And then he goes, yeah. I almost fell off the platform laughing. He goes, tell me 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 50 feet, 40 feet, because I'm like, what do you mean you don't see me? He's right there.
Right.
That's the worst feeling ever. I've been on both sides of that.
I know what boat you guys are in because I look over and I just see two guys
Two
with no
little dudes.
two guys with no shirts on. They're sunbathing out there. What's up with you with no shirt?
I love the sun. I always have. I'm surprised I don't have skin cancer. And Timmy, I think, used to call us Team Vertically Challenged because we were so short.
So short, both of you guys.
But Tom and I had a blast. We got a chance to do a lot together, and we won the Gold Cup finally, and we would have won the second in a row, except your dad pulled out a 150 something the last day.
I cut five straps that last day.
You beat us by that. You beat us at the very last day.
One of my last Gold Cups?
Yeah. You beat us on that we would have won. We were ready to go. We were like ready to go. And
we went from dead last to first.
Yeah. So
I think I've told the story, but I know whether or not I've told you about Kenny Klett telling me that I had to go move my truck, right? Remember that story?
No.
So it was the last day of that Gold Cup, and Hoover and I are getting ready to take off, waiting for the horn to go off, and Kenny Klett and Azo is right next to us, and Kenny Klett says, hey, you got to go move your truck.
Wait a minute. The horn to go off in the morning to leave?
Yeah, it's the last on the Friday morning, the last day of the tournament.
Okay.
We're in the boat, motors running,
Getting
waiting
ready
for the
to
horn.
take off.
Getting ready to take off. Kenny goes, hey, you got to move your truck. I said, what are you talking about? I knew he was messing with me.
Yeah.
He said, man, you're always in the top 3 going into the last day. You're in dead last. Your parking spot's got bad mojo on it.
Oh, no.
This is a true story. So I said, Timmy, take me to the dock. And he didn't want to take me to the dock. I said, man, you got to take me to the dock. So we're motoring over to the Lorelei dock
Colette got in your head.
They shoot the horn. Everybody takes off. And I grab my bag out of the front hatch, get my keys. I move my truck as far away from that parking spot as I could. I mean, I've never been superstitious in my life.
Gosh.
And I get back in the boat. I said, Timmy, this is the first really nice day we've had. The whole week's been terrible, rainy, cloudy. All of our fish are falling off. And the field is only 1,400 points ahead of us. I said, you find me the fish, we're going to catch them.
Yeah, we were one of them. Thank you.
We had 5 bites, caught all 5 fish. I mean,
And one of them
thank
was
God
like
I
big.
moved. Thank God I moved my truck.
Or was that a different tournament where you caught like a 150 the last day and beat Tom and I?
That was a different tournament because
Okay.
when you
I'm
came
thinking
back with
about
5
that
straps,
one.
you beat Carlos and Rob.
No,
That was Carlson Rob. We
no,
beat.
this one you beat us with 150 something on the last day. You came in with that giant of a fish. I don't know if you caught it the or whatnot, but it was like, you've got to be
He took
kidding
that from your playbook because that's what you normally do.
Anyway, I just want to say here, you have always been so generous with your knowledge, your enthusiasm. When I started getting into the tournaments, you were one of my biggest fans.
Oh, yeah.
And that's hard to come by. And I remember that after that year, you were fishing the tournament. You were fishing the Gold Cup when we had those 5 straps on the last day. You were fishing with Joe Rodriguez, and
That's
after
right.
that,
Yeah.
you were actually fishing it. You called me like 3 times like that week, going, "That was outrageous." You
Yeah,
know,
it's
most people wouldn't do that, but I got to tell you, watching you at the dock with all the other anglers and guides, you are so effervescent with your enthusiasm. And Timmy Klein says, and Paul Tejera too. No one is more passionate about the poon.
I don't want to lose, but you know what? When we won that last Golden Fly, I always used to say when people used to say, he's cocky and everything else, I used to say, beat me. I'll be the first person to hand you that trophy and say congratulations.
Yeah, you are that guy.
I mean, go for it. That's great because that's what this is all about. And I don't think people understood that. It wasn't about me, like I said. I never fished against somebody. I fished against myself and the fish. And that's what people didn't understand. Mm-hmm. And if I lost, then I lost. And good luck. I mean, when that Golden Fly hit, I was the first person to congratulate Rob and his angler. And I said, good job, guys. They walked in 2 minutes. They pulled the Flutie. They walked in 2 minutes before it was too late with those straps. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Good job.
What do you think, besides being able to have polished all these little moving parts as far as the technicalities and the methodology of catching these fish, other people have these polished pieces too. How were you able to win all these tournaments so easily?
Well, it's funny you say that. It's not. I don't know that you can ever say.
Obviously, you need a great guide. It's a team event.
Absolutely.
You can't catch what's not there.
You got to trust your guide, but you just, the little things have taken us a long way. The tackle has taken us a long way, and I'm a firm believer in the fly lines that I use. I want to make sure that when I get to an area, I understand what's the depth of the fish. How's he moving? How fast is he moving? And that'll dictate how I'm going to throw, what I'm going to throw. I switched over to Rio fly lines for tarpon fishing. A lot of people don't like them. They're a little harder to throw, but they don't stretch. And I think that is imperative on a good hook set to get no stretch in that fly line.
Right.
So I swear by those. And over on the coast, I only use a sinking tip fly line. Because again, those big fish, I don't want them to have to come up to eat the fly. Because a lot of times when they come up to eat the fly, they can blow the fly out. So I like to get them down deep and whatnot. But the biggest key, I think, and this is what I've tried to teach some different people that I've in the tournaments that I've talked to at various times, is I don't understand when they say we went out. I actually told a friend of mine, I never want to hear this again, that I went out and I jumped 8 and caught 1. I'm like, why? Why'd you jump 8 and only caught 1?
Why was that? Yeah.
Yeah. Why didn't you jump 8 and catch 6 or, catch 8? Of course, that's, you're not gonna catch 8, but they're like, well, wait a minute. I mean, tarpon fall off. I'm like, yes, but they don't have to. What are you doing that's making them fall off? So, again, I've refined what I consider that only works for me now. And this is what I tell people. If I try to give anybody any advice, I like to see what they're doing to see how I might be able to help them build from what they're doing, but never change utterly what they're doing, because you can destroy somebody by doing that. But I think that our hook set is so important on how we set that hook on that fish and how hard I fight the fish. I want that fish to the boat as quick as possible in a tournament, because that might be that few seconds difference between he falls off and not. And I got to tell you, I think that just makes all the difference in the world. And then I have, really good relationships with my guides. But it's all about reading the fish, understanding what it's going to take to make that fish eat. Now, I don't have the understanding like you do on the ocean. My understanding is primarily on backcountry.
Right.
So I'm allowed to be more sloppy than you guys are allowed to be because it's different.
Right. But you were mentioning earlier this morning a different hook that you're using on the ocean.
Yeah.
And that plays into the fact that you can never set the hook on a tarpon until you feel the weight of the fish in your stripping hand. A lot of people set that hook with a visual bite.
That's crazy.
Raising that rod tip.
You almost have to shut your eyes.
But what's the new hook you're using?
Well, there's two hooks I'm using. One in the Florida Bay. We use very big flies on these areas that Steve and I were fishing. Very big, very bushy, really hard to throw. And I would only use a Tiemco 600 SP. I would use a 4.0 wide gap hook. I mean, it's a really wide gap hook. And I would buy a couple of boxes of 100 apiece, and I would take them out. And if it didn't automatically by itself grab my fingernail, I'd throw it away. I just get rid of it. So out of a box of 100, I might get 30 that were perfect hooks.
You don't believe in sharpening hooks like Rob Fordyce?
No, I do not. Maybe because I'm not good at it. But a lot of these laser sharp hooks or whatnot, the minute you do that, sometimes you end up rolling the point on a tarpon or whatnot. I'd rather just throw it away and get a new hook. So then I send those to our fly. We've got a fly tire that Steve and I use, and he knows just to tie it off those. Now, the ocean side, a lot of people do a lot of things different. We've gotten to the point where we've just kind of used circle hooks. And
tell me why those work so well for you.
Well, they didn't work.
And why wouldn't you use circle hooks back in the dark water in Florida Bay? Because you're still doing the same thing. You're still stripping the fly until you get tight.
I think that you could. I really honestly do think you could. I just haven't done it, to be honest with you, because I think the fishing, if you did the same thing that we're doing out front in the back, why wouldn't you?
Right.
Just haven't done it yet. There's no reason. There's no good answer to that right now. But the funny thing is, a lot of these people fishing circle hooks or whatnot, it's very different because the last thing you do is pull when the fish eats. You pull right out of his mouth. You've got to sit there and almost do nothing. And you can slowly strip until you feel him, and then you just hold it. You don't do anything. You just hold it and let the fish come tight on it. And it's I don't know what causes it to do it, but it finds its own little spot and it starts to dig that little offset point, starts to dig in. And every fish I've hooked with one of those circle hooks, and I use the offshore angler, believe it or not, the wide gap circle hook. It's a wide gap one. I use a very small one. It's like a 1.0, but it's a really wide gap. And I've caught 90, 100-pound fish on it, and it works.
But that's insinuating the fish is eating the fly and turning his face. Because that circle hook, I would assume, will have a hard time getting in the fish's face if he eats the fly and comes at you, because then you're taking up slack. And how is that circle hook going to get in the corner of his mouth?
You're right. And let's just stick on the ocean side for that answer. Most of the time, like you say, you guys are more proficient on ocean fishing than I am. I don't ever throw at a fish head on anywhere I go. Anywhere I go. If I can avoid it, I will never do it. I will always try to get a 10 o'clock or a 2 o'clock at the least. And if when I was throwing my circles out there on those, I would throw it, and then I would still put the rod tip off just to the side enough to where it's never straight on him.
Right.
So just that little bit of
Angle.
Of angle, as soon as he feels it, he tends to turn away from you anyway. And then I would just hold on.
Yeah, he'll set the hook for you.
I just set and I'm like, this is crazy. It's going to come off. I'm using 30, 40-pound shock. They never come off. They don't ever come off, but they never bite through it.
Right.
It's always hooked in their lip.
Well, also too, yeah, because that shock's never going to be inside their mouth with the circle hook.
And
now you can actually fish on the ocean with 30-pound shock.
You absolutely could. Now you're going to get a giant one occasionally that might just inhale it, but I've caught 80s and 90s out there like crazy on that particular hook, and it works really well. Like we said, we caught them in the. We've hooked them all through different parts of Florida Bay, so I have no idea why they wouldn't work. I would think just getting a big 4.0 on my big flies for out back in the mud,
absolutely.
I would think that would be perfect.
Really good.
As a matter of fact, I've got my guy tying me some.
Oh, awesome.
It's, we've covered a pretty good spectrum here. How would you like to wrap this up? Anything you'd like to add?
Well, like I said, my biggest joy anymore is helping others do that. And what I've decided to do now that I'm kind of retired from, we sold our business, and I'm going to start booking about 30 days a year in May and June. And I just want to work with people who want to have me maybe help them understand tarpon fishing a little bit better.
And what about guys out there that might be looking for a guide to start tournament fishing? Would you be available for that? Or are you over tournaments?
You know what? As a rule, I'm pretty much over tournaments. It would have to be with somebody that I really, really would like to fish with. And
that you know that you can win with.
That I know, and that I know if I'm going to put in all that extra time, that's because they're willing to put in and invest the time as well to make it work.
Right.
Otherwise, I just want to help people. And Lefty Crate, give you the story. I'd heard about Lefty for years. I never knew him. And I was having a trouble with these big flies, throwing a long cast and everything else. And I called Lefty out of the blue probably 15 years ago. And I just said, hey, Lefty, it's Klein Flutie. Somebody told me that you might be able to help me. And he said, I've heard of you. And he took my call and he asked me what I was doing. And I said, I'm having a little bit of a problem getting this. And he said, could you have somebody film it and send it to me? And I did. And I called him back and he said, here's what I want you to do. And he said, as far as I can see, you're not allowing your rod to go back far enough with that big of a fly. You're trying to get too much forward cast out of too small of a back
You're
cast.
creeping forward.
Yep. He said, as soon as your line's going back, you're automatically going forward. So you're cutting out 50% of your forward momentum.
Stroke.
Yep. And I couldn't see that. And sure enough, I went out and started dipping and doing that. And holy crap, all of a sudden it just flies. So that's what I want to do for others, and I've got an email and I get my phone number out. If somebody wants to call me or email me. And I'm just looking at,
What a great mentor they could have.
That's all I want to do is help people out at this point, Andy. I don't,
Yeah, we'll put your email and your website or your phone number on the website, on our website, so people can contact you through there.
Anything they want, because like I said, I'm certainly no Lefty Cray, but I kind of like.
But you're a better tarpon fisherman than Lefty Cray.
Well, I don't know about that. All I know is he helped me out at a time when he didn't have any reason to do so.
He was awesome.
And if I could do that, that's my legacy at this point, is what can I do to help others, get better at fishing. And that's just all I want to do anymore, to be honest with you.
Well, Glenn, it was a great visit.
Yeah.
You've been a good friend, a great pal, and a great inspiration to anybody that's ever wanted to catch a tarpon. And a bonefish too, by the way. They think of you as a tarpon fisherman, but your bonefishing skills, your track record speaks for itself.
It was, let me say, growing up in the Keys was like a dream come true.
Yeah.
It
Well,
was the best.
Thank you, bro.
Thank you. I really
That was
appreciate
awesome.
it. Thank you.
Big
Thank you so
time
much.
fun.
Thanks so much for the
good.
stories. Yeah, it's
Thanks,
great to
buddy.
see you again.
It's good to be out there fishing around you too. We've done that enough around each other,
It's a lot of fun.
isn't it?
It's not fun when you come in with a 145 though.
It depends on who's coming in with the 145.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So it's West Side Story. What I saw, it's just a